Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for our April educational webinar entitled Saving Time and Money on the Front End. My name is Margaret Heron and I am an M33 account manager here in our Greenville, South Carolina office, and joining me is Chris Colley.
Good afternoon and welcome to the educational webinar. I am an M33 employee as well and the operations manager here at our Greensboro facility in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Just want to let you know we are committed to keeping this under half an hour. We really greatly appreciate your time today and we are glad to have you. The discussion topics throughout the webinar are a lot of what we have seen as a result of our audit and pay management for our clients that we want to share with you in hopes that you can become more aware of ways to save time and money from the start. We want to help you mitigate risk. The processes you establish prior to shipping can really affect the resources, more resources than you may think. Companies are oftentimes paying higher rates and they don't even know it. Without the right tools in place to audit invoices, many will pass through undetected. What do you think that could cost you over a period of time? With that being said, this leads into our main focus of today's webinar. Most all shippers have experienced some kind of pain before in regards to shipments, whether it be higher rates on an invoice than what you were expecting or the frustrations and time and energy of having to go back and forth with carriers to have things changed or corrected. We want to help you, the shipper, eliminate these potential headaches and increase costs by being as prepared as possible on the front end. Chris is now going to jump in and review some key things to remember and keep in mind about party responsibility for freight costs.
Thanks, Margaret. I want to start off by talking about freight terms and how important it is that we select the correct freight payment at the bill of lading at time of shipping. Selecting the wrong freight terms can become very costly not only for you but your customer as well. Some of the side effects we've seen from choosing incorrect freight payment terms are delayed shipments, freight gets delayed, freight gets refused, you get charged back from your customer, and then there's the extra cost for freight bill corrections. So in order to make sure that you're selecting the correct freight payment terms, we wanted to talk about the different types of freight payments in a little bit more detail. As you can see here in this slide, it's got some of the freight terms listed out. There are actually 6 possible choices for freight terms. The first one's prepaid, prepaid NAD, collect, then there's third party, and it could be either third party collect, third party prepaid, or third party prepaid NAD. Third party just indicates to the carrier that you're neither the shipper or the receiver, but the responsible party for the freight payments as well as the freight ownership. So meaning that you have the ownership of the freight during transit. Prepaid indicates that the shipper is paying for the freight and also has the ownership of the product until it's signed for by the consignee. Prepaid NAD has the same meaning as prepaid, except for that the shipper is going to charge the customer back for the freight payment. Collect indicates that the consignee will be paying for the freight and take ownership of the shipment as soon as it leaves the shipper's dock. The bill of lading also has a section that can protect shippers when shipping freight collect. As you can see here, that section is called Section 7 and can typically be found on the right-hand side of the bill of lading underneath the freight terms. When Section 7 is signed, the consignee for any reason doesn't pay the carrier for freight charges. This just means that the carrier has no recourse to come back to the shipper. So it's important to note that you should only be signing this if you're shipping freight collect. And again, this is the section that you would want to sign.
Just as important as it is to get your freight terms correct on the front end, billing accuracy is just as important. In order to eliminate invoice discrepancies, you must state a bill to address if it's a third-party shipment or if invoices are going through M33 system. Carriers code and invoice according to what is listed in this particular section. So the rate will create a discrepancy if the address is wrong or different from what they have programmed in their system. Carriers, it's also important that carriers will default payment to the shipper if this section is left blank. You know, even if it's a collect shipment and it's marked so in the freight terms, but this bill to section is left blank, they will default payment to shipper. And this is important to know if you're using third-party billing. And also, obviously, you want to avoid the issue of not receiving the invoice altogether. Have you ever wondered why the carrier invoice was higher than expected? Or not sure why there's a discrepancy in rates? Did you know that you can be hit with a weight and inspection certificate due to incorrect weights listed on the bill of lading, or for cubic capacity where your freight was greater than the linear feet allocated for these particular LTL carriers, or if you list an incorrect product description, or the class is listed wrong, or even left blank? All these reasons, and there are more for reasons why you could receive this W&I certificate along with an invoice with extra charges. These days, many carriers pass the majority of shipments through this inspection process, and in fact, carriers are actually using this as extra revenue stream. It's important to make sure you have proper scales, and you should know that you can have your scale certified. Carriers typically like to have these certifications renewed every 6 months. And one thing also to add, M33 actually uses these certificates to dispute reweigh fees for our clients who have actually had their scale certified. So it's a good thing to be prepared on the front end, making sure that you are using a density calculator and weighing everything properly and obtaining accurate measurements of your freight before it ships. It's also important to make sure your vendors are listing accurate information on the bill of lading for collect shipments so that your company doesn't have to absorb any extra fees. For vendors of our clients that are compliant and calling into M33 for inbound shipping, we make sure that our logistics coordinators are properly trained to ask all the right questions to eliminate these potential risks and extra work that could be created on the back end. Another point to consider for prepaid and ad shipments, you might tell a customer a rate and end up getting billed a higher rate. And it's important to do note that the carrier rate is only an estimate when it ships. The rate is not final until the invoice is actually created. However, you don't want your company to have to absorb these charges that could have been prevented on the front end. Freight class and product descriptions are extremely important as well to list on the bill of lading. And just a side note, next month's educational webinar will further review freight classifications in more detail. We know that this is a common problem that so many people have questions around, so I definitely encourage you to be sure to tune in to that discussion next month. And also, the class that's listed on the bill of lading affects the release value if a situation arises where you have to file a claim. Whatever is listed on the bill of lading for the class, that will affect how much the carrier is responsible for and how much they will pay out if a claim is filed. And just to paint a better picture for you, to show the importance of listing the proper class on your bill of lading, this is an example of a customer of ours who failed to list the freight class on the bill of lading and how it impacted their invoice rate. In this example, the client's product's actual class was class 55. They failed to list it on the bill of lading, so the carrier then reclassified it to 150. And you can see, look at the rate increase as the class goes up and the percentages associated with these different rates. They incurred an almost $400 higher charge, or 57% increase, due to failing to list the class on the bill of lading. So clearly this can make a huge impact. And it also creates a lot of time to have to resolve with carriers to adjust the class so that it accurately reflects what was shipped. So Definitely always be sure to list a class and a detailed product description on the bill of lading.
Although we hope you guys don't see too many of these pictures, I'm sure many of you have seen your fair share of them come across your desks. We want to talk about some of the ways that we can help prevent these types of pictures from coming across your desk by setting and binding expectations on your bill of lading. It's important to note that the carrier is only responsible for what they've signed for. So ensuring that the driver signs for the correct number of pieces is a good way to prevent issues at delivery. Noting handling requirements such as fragile, do not double stack, top load only, or even stackable can help set the expectation of how your product should be handled from the carrier, as well as reduce product damage. These notations on the bill of lading can also help reduce your chances of getting hit with cubic capacity invoices by taking the time on the front end and documenting how the shipment left your dock.
Chris, you make some good points. Definitely, if the situation arises where a claim needs to be filed, you as the shipper, you need to make sure that you're covered so that you can receive a full claim amount if you do have to file a claim because the carrier did something that you told them not to do. So it's extremely important to be very specific and detailed in your instructions for particular handling requirements. You know, how many claims do you think are denied due to having no notation at all about handling requirements on the bill of lading? What do you think that could cost you? Along the same lines of setting expectations, the more details, the better. You can never be too detailed on the bill of lading. Make sure your consignee address is completed completely and accurately. You don't want to incur reconsignment fees due to a street address being wrong or an inaccurate zip code. Also, be sure to provide contact details for someone in receiving, especially for shipments needing delivery appointments. You know, carriers have to abide by receiving hours, and we've seen a lot of clients hit with redelivery fees because a carrier showed up at the consignee after receiving hours when in reality they had no idea what the receiving hours were because it was not listed on the bill of lading. So definitely be very specific and detailed so that these types of situations don't occur. Along the same lines, weekend hours and holiday schedules are equally important to state as well. You know, lots of times the company may be closed, but there are still people receiving shipments in a warehouse. Carriers also need to know where the freight is going ahead of time. So it's important to be sure to communicate on the bill of lading if it's going to a job site or a place with limited access. You don't want to have to receive any additional costs because it wasn't specified on the bill of lading. And lastly, just to touch on the value of key performance metrics, reporting efforts are only as good as the data entered on the front end. In other words, don't take shortcuts. In order to get the most out of your reporting metrics, be sure to enter as much information on the bill of lading as possible. You know, this includes PO numbers, sales order numbers, job numbers, weights, special requirements. Our reports can be even more beneficial to your company when you start to dive in and study KPIs or customer trends. Remember, you get out what you put in. You know, we really encourage you to take the time on the front end to make efforts on the back end more beneficial and resourceful. And in the end, all of these points are important because of the effect it could potentially have on your company's wallet. But we're all here for our customers. We want to make them happy. We want to provide great buying experiences. You know, when a customer is happy, everyone's happy. So we encourage you to strive to make the right steps on the front end to ensure good business practices and positive buying experiences. Thank you again so much for your time. We hope that you are able to walk away with some informative tips on how you and your shipping department can make the best decisions and save time and money on the front end. Feel free to reach out to myself or to Chris if you have any questions or if you want to talk further about any discussions that were mentioned today. And please do use the contact information listed on the screen. Hope you have a great afternoon, and thanks again for your time.